Right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us, for those of you online. My name is Dr. Gretchen Latsavita, and I am the Executive Director of the Masters of Science in Nursing program here at NEIU, and the Chair of the Search Committee and Director of Health Services. So welcome to all of you, and I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to Dr. Guadalupe Hernandez, who has been with us for the day today and comes with a wealth of experience, and we are so excited to have her here. She is going to be presenting to all of you her vision and outlook, the Director of Student Health Services. So again, thank you all so much. We're going to spend about a half hour or 45 minutes in the presentation, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So take it away. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you everyone who took the time to join us today. It's been nothing but a very positive experience being here today, and I just want to say thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you all to share my story and my vision for the Director of Student Health Services. Now it's working. Alrighty, so I'd like to start out a little bit with my journey into healthcare. It actually started somewhere about 23, 24 years ago when I was a high school student. And by chance, I like to say it wasn't so much by chance, but by chance, I found a flyer while I was sitting in my division, and it was for a basic nursing assistant program. And on that flyer, it had several questions for an invitation to join the program. But one of the questions that stood out the most to me was, do you like to help people? And again, it's the only question that I can remember from that flyer. And that question alone has changed my life and my whole entire career trajectory. So I started out as a basic nursing assistant, went on to take practical nursing courses while also balancing my full-time high school courses, and then eventually attained my doctorate in nursing practice. It was actually a dual degree program. It was a DNP MBA through Johns Hopkins University. And so it's been quite the journey, but I like to say that nursing chose me when I found that flyer. And every role that I've taken, I've worked in different areas of healthcare. So I did start out in the bedside as an ICU nurse, went on to work in primary care as a family nurse practitioner. I taught in different nursing programs and also in cardiology research. I've taken roles in different leadership positions, but in all those roles, it's all been guided by that passion and that core value of help people. How I've been able to do that has really shifted and evolved over the years, especially as I gained more experience, more awareness of what's needed to actually help people. And like many of us know, this can be very complex, especially when there's many challenges. But till this day, I'm still guided by this passion and this principle. So a lot of the work that I've done has been to reduce a lot of those barriers to access to healthcare, as well as improve systems so that no one's ever left behind. As far as the interest of coming into this position, I see an opportunity because a lot of my passion and that core value really aligns with the role. And so I really see an opportunity to be able to take my background, all of my experience, my education, and even my lived experience to ensure that students have access to care that's inclusive and that's student-centered. I also see an opportunity to be able to be the advocate that allows students, especially those who come from underrepresented groups, to have the support to feel seen, and feel empowered in their care. And again, that my own vision, and it really aligns really well with the university. So not only do students deserve an exceptional learning environment, but also high quality care. And to accomplish that, care needs to be holistic, it needs to be inclusive, it needs to be equitable. There is no one size fits all when it comes to receiving the appropriate services and care. So I really like to focus on making sure that students receive tailored support for their needs, as well as engage students to lead and be their own advocates, while we also advocate for them. And like I mentioned, there is no one size fits all when it comes to providing services to students. When I think about diversity, I like to look at it through the lens of intersectionality. So consider all of their multiple identities. It's very rare that I've ever met a student in my profession that didn't have at least one other marginalized identity that needed to be considered. And so in my time here, I've realized that Northeastern is actually really great about having this conversation about how those identities can all, come in one, student can come with multiple identities. So I find that really impressive because it's not a conversation that I have very often where individuals acknowledge that. So really impressed with that. I like to share a case though, for those who may not be as familiar with what that could look like. And so this is just a short case example. So this case that I created, it's not very uncommon to see this, although this one I created myself. It's something that I see, you shift a few identities here and there, but that's very typical of the type of students and patients that I've cared for. And so we have AZ, who's a 20-year-old female, uses the pronouns she, her. She's Nigerian American, and she's the daughter of Nigerian immigrant parents. She identifies as lesbian. She has ADHD, so she does have a disability, but it's not acknowledged by her parents. She also has anxiety, and that's also not acknowledged by her family. They have very traditional views of ADHD and anxiety, so she's not necessarily getting that support at home. She's experimented with alcohol to cope with a lot of the academic and cultural pressures. Again, her parents are very traditional when it comes to education. They have very high expectations for her. So she does not live on campus. She does live with her parents, who again, I mentioned, have very traditional views about mental health, sexual orientation. And because she's so busy trying to manage her responsibilities, she really doesn't have time for friends, which has caused her to have a lot of social isolation as well. She does struggle with focus, time management, and organization due to her ADHD and anxiety diagnosis. Her grades have been impacted. She's not participating the way that she was participating early on in the semester, which has really impacted her grades. And she's feeling so frustrated about this because she feels like she's trying so hard, but she's still falling behind. And her English professor mentioned that she has so much potential, but really should apply herself more. So again, it's very unfortunate because this is not something that's uncommon. And there's a metaphor that I like. It's the cannery in the coal mine. And I'll just give you a quick history of what, where that comes from. So coal miners used to bring in these birds because the birds are much more sensitive to toxic gases like carbon monoxide. And so the miners knew when there were these toxins, because if the birds were in distress, the humans were next. So when I think about students like AZ, I think about the cannery birds. They're much more sensitive. So you start to see several students like AC struggling, that means the rest of her peers will probably be suffering as well. If you see AZ thriving in this institution, then that means the rest of her peers will be, everyone will benefit from that. And so this quote is from Dr. Crenshaw, which is the person who coined the term intersectionality. And she said, if we aren't addressing the needs of the most vulnerable, we aren't addressing the system at all. And so how do we know if students are getting the services that they need, the care that they need? How do we really assess what we could be doing to support and intervene for the students? And so number one, I feel that we really need to start by understanding our students deeply. And then the strategies can come from that data, from their voices and their real experiences. So some of the possible solutions are student feedback, and there's many different ways to do this. I know that sometimes the response rate of surveys can be very low. And so looking at creative ways to solicit this feedback. The surveys can be done in many creative ways and in ways that are engaging to students. Focus groups, panel discussions, and like the birds, really track for early warning signs before the student's in crisis, before the student needs more services. So a few ideas is to track utilization of services. So really look at, are the students who are from these marginalized groups using the services at the same rate as their peers? If they're not, why not? Partner with frontline observers, so trained faculty, peers, advisors, to really notice the subtle signs of when a student is struggling, and then do early referrals so that we can catch them at a time when we could really intervene and make an impact. So another idea is evaluate that time to support. So how long did it take from the first time the student was flagged as needing support or concern until they got the care that they needed? And how we can improve that. What were the outcomes if they didn't receive the support on time? Also really break down the utilization and outcomes by these different identities. So gender, race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, etc. To really get a good idea of where we can be more strategic and target our intervention. Another suggestion is collect qualitative data. So go beyond the numbers. Numbers are great. I know we love numbers, but sometimes the stories that we get from students are just as important. And again, this can come in so many different creative ways. Like I know social media, there's a trend of like a day in the life of, and so have students do something that they're already doing in a fun way to really share their stories, and the students get to express them themselves, but we also get to collect that information as well. So there's a concern about how do we make sure that everyone feels included, even if they're part of a satellite campus or if they're remote learners. How do we make sure that everybody is feeling like they are getting what they need? So it can be challenging because students from satellite campuses or online students can feel very disconnected from the main campus. So one of the main priorities would be how to engage those who are from not in the main campus, especially for online students. So really get creative with engagement strategies. One that I feel would be really impactful would be to expand the student health ambassadors program and really look at how we can broaden the scope and really look for ways where it could be very beneficial, especially for online students. Also expanding the wellness kiosk, but also ways where we can continue to do more low barrier services. So The wellness kiosk is great if they're on campus, but if they're online, it might be a good idea to have the student health ambassadors also participate in supporting students from other campuses. So there's a university, Boston University, who has a program called the Condom Ferry. And so students can actually go online and order contraceptives, so that way they don't have to go in person. And also it also eliminates a lot of the shame or embarrassment that a student might have because they can just order it from online. Also, another low barrier service could be telehealth, which I learned today is already being done through the mental health services. So there is already some data to support telehealth and how that may be helpful. Of course, we do want them to feel like they belong, and there's nothing like in person, but telehealth could be a great way to also reach them and really bridge. To get a lot of this done, it's very important to have a lot of partnerships and collaborations. And in my career, in my profession, my professional journey, I've been part of a lot of professional organizations, a lot of volunteer work, where I've been out in the community and have really been able to engage with a lot of different stakeholders from many different sectors. And so being able to communicate with individuals who are also not very familiar with healthcare or academic institutions, and how do you get buy-in from individuals who maybe are supportive but don't know how to support. And a lot of the tools that I've used to be able to do that is really learn how to build trust, learn what our shared goals are, and learn how to communicate with different stakeholders based on those goals, because we all have our own priorities, but a lot of the times we can really mutually benefit each other. And one example of a time that I've had to do this, and I'll go with a recent example because there's been many, but I'll go with a more recent example, and one that's very complex. When I was a research associate at Northwestern, we were trying to increase the number of research participants who are from diverse backgrounds. And this was very difficult because at Northwestern, the demographic tends to not be very diverse. So we really had to get creative as well because of the type of research project that we had, where there was a lot of specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. We had to be very careful to make sure that we were following all of the protocols. And part of the struggle was that looking for participants outside of Northwestern also complicated things because of the EMR, and that made it challenging to then follow up with participants. So we had to get creative. Number one, we had to find out what were some of the barriers to participation. And so I led that. I was able to find some resources even throughout the university where they were very helpful in helping me find community members, where we can host a resource panel where they were able to, community members were able to share their stories, why they have participated or why they haven't participated. And other community leaders also were a part of the panel, and they were able to share some of the concerns that they've heard from patients or other community constituents. So it was very beneficial. I really had some ideas of what some of those barriers would be, but also some were very shocking. So it also taught me to be very, cautious with not making too many assumptions about what the needs are, even though I may be familiar with them. So it was also having to find partners that could then refer, that are technically part of Northwestern, but maybe not part of Northwestern. So I ended up finding a physician at Jesse Brown VA who does have a collaboration with Northwestern. And so we were able to, I love that, to talk to the physician and sort of get a good idea of what our shared goal was and how this collaboration could be beneficial. And it really worked out very nicely. But one of the constraints was that now those participants lack transportation. So now we had to partner with a transportation service. Once we got that checked off, now we had to find a service that we could collaborate with that would offer us a lower cost to getting patients transported to the facility. And so there were more of those layers on and on. As we solved one, we had another. And so it was very important to continue to collaborate with other individuals to make sure that everything kind of came together smoothly. And so I learned a lot about how to be more strategic, about how to communicate better, how to really be able to identify early on what those shared goals are. And at Northwestern, I can see something similar, putting together something similar, like a shared resource group where we can have regular conversations about what are the needs of the community members, the healthcare facilities, healthcare providers in the community, as well as the university and other important stakeholders. So empowering students through healthcare initiatives. So when I think about empowering students, I really, like I mentioned, would love to expand and broaden the scope of the student health ambassadors. And also, I think it's very important to really meet students where they are developmentally. And students, especially undergraduate students who fall in the range of 18 to 25, their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until about 25. And so what that means is that for a lot of students that age, health behaviors is not a top priority because they don't have the intrinsic motivation. They sometimes will choose short-term comfort over that long-term comfort just because of where they are developmentally. And so one of the ways to do that is continue the student health ambassadors, because then they get that adaptive peer pressure. So there's that peer-to-peer. And also, I'm a big proponent of gamification, because that really allows students to enjoy being healthy because they don't have that intrinsic motivation. We give them an opportunity to experience something extrinsically. Ultimately, the goal is to one day, develop more of that intrinsic motivation. But until they get to that point, we can make health fun. And I like to think of it, I mentioned, like sneaking in the broccoli into the mac and cheese. So that it gives them a fun way. It's also very social for those who are socially isolated. And I don't know if you guys have read the Surgeon General report from about a year or two, where they found that loneliness is as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it does give them that social component. It's fun. They're enjoying themselves. And also eliminate some of the stigma and some of the emotional barriers to going and receiving services, especially for those more sensitive needs like mental health. That kind of engagement where it's fun, where it's normalized, can also help with that. So overall, why create a culture of wellness, right? Why is this really important? And the reason I'm very passionate about working with student health services is because one of the prerequisites for success on campus is health and wellness. For their academic success, they need to be healthy. They need to be well, holistically, mental, emotional, spiritually. They need to have access to care to be able to remain healthy. And then there are studies that show that education is one of the strongest and most consistent predictors of health and longevity. So keeping them healthy helps them be successful in their academic career, but then being successful academically helps them stay healthy. So you can't separate those two. You really need to make sure that they have both. So Any questions?
I have one question and comment. You mentioned to understand the barriers to participation and success. In the time that you've been with us today, do you feel like you have an understanding of what some of the core barriers might be here at NEIU? And how, and I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but how would you think about addressing those core barriers?
Yeah, it seems to be one of the main ones that I find could be easily addressed, but it's a big one, is it was mentioned twice about visibility of the services. So students don't know where to find the service. And that's a huge barrier. That should be a minimum. So really increasing visibility for the services, how to find them, especially because they're so separated throughout campus, being able to really reinforce that and figure out what are the best ways to distribute that information, because they can't utilize them if they don't know they're there or where they're at. So that's a big one that could be resolved pretty quickly. Unfortunately, it's the other barrier is one that we're seeing in many organizations, and that's funding for the services. Students not having access to insurance is really, it sounds like it's causing a lot of fragmented care, because they are not receiving, they can get the diagnosis, but maybe they're not receiving the medications to go with that, as well as maybe any preventative care, like vaccines, which they'll need insurance for. So I find those to be the two that I've noticed so far. The funding and the visibility. That's so right on. I have no other, but I think, one of the things of being on a campus that's a little bit older is that you make space where you can, but it does create a disjointedness at times. Yes. Yeah, and one of the suggestions, because it did come up in one of the sessions, is really leveraging technology. Maybe we can't change the infrastructure, right? But making sure that we don't lose any students in that process. If they go in and see one of the providers and they complete a PHQ, and that provider decides that this student would benefit from seeking some mental health services, maybe using technology, a platform like Microsoft Teams, where the provider can message the mental health provider and say, hey, this student came in, this was what I observed, can you make sure that they follow up? Yes. So we don't lose them in the process. So it's very hard to change the physical issue, but making sure that we still accomplish that continuity, that make sure that we don't lose any students in the process. Absolutely.
We have a question from Pam Geddes. Pam, you could unmute yourself, please.
Hi, thank you for a great presentation. I'm a faculty member in the biology department, and I also co-direct the Living Learning Communities. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest in the position. I have a question. I think you alluded to it when you were presenting. So we have a lot of students that have that combo of needing health support, but also mental health support. And as you probably saw, those two, and you alluded to this, those are in two very different places. And yet when we get students coming, and I'm speaking as a faculty member, students come in with usually physical symptoms, but there's sometimes a background of mental health issues that correlate with those physical health symptoms. So I'm wondering how, and I have a sense from what you presented that you love to integrate those two. I think, we are trying to look for all these students in a very holistic way because of the intersectionalities that you spoke about. So it's not only mental health, physical health, it's if they have enough to eat, if they have somewhere safe to sleep, a home. And so I'm wondering, what's your take on potentially being a person that interfaces not only with all these other services that we have at NEIU, which right now are kind of siloed in separate offices, but then also potentially with the community. A lot of our students come and they will eventually need further supports that we cannot give as an institution. For example, students that are experiencing homelessness, and if they come with something related to, oh, I have a cold, I'm feeling really bad, and you find out through your interaction that there's homelessness, we have services on campus to sort of do emergency things, but we may have to communicate and connect with the community as a whole. I'm just hoping that you can elaborate a little bit about how qualified or how you feel that perspective as in your position, being able to sort of help with those bridges to holistically support our students.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. That's a great question. And I think that's where, when I talked about the resource group, being proactive, so inviting, having already an idea of what some of the students are dealing with, some of the challenges, let's us be proactive about it, finding diverse partners and collaboration so that we can ensure that we have some, partners that can help us in many different areas. And I worked a lot with, like I mentioned, in several sectors, different community-based organizations. And so I feel very comfortable with reaching out. I do have a pretty large network as well. And if I don't have someone, I can usually find someone that knows somebody. So I do feel very comfortable in that sense where I feel that part I can accomplish, find a lot of individuals who I can collaborate and partner with to help the students. I know a lot of places are dealing with a lot of their own funding issues, but I think there's many ways to work together where we can kind of work around some of that. But as far as finding the partners and people to collaborate so that we can meet some of those needs, that part I feel very comfortable with.
Thank you.
Any other questions going once?
I can ask another one. If and it's my last one, but one of the issues that we experience is that sometimes our students don't have the self-agency that we would love for them to have. And I think this is it's a product of their circumstances and the trauma that they have experienced. And so many times, a very common thing that we do at Northeastern is, here is where you have to go. We give them a piece of paper with who they need to talk to and who they need to see, and they never follow through. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, how can you help, or how can you think about working proactively? Sometimes it takes us reaching students multiple times, and so this increases your workload significantly because it's just not sending a piece of paper. You need to follow up with a student to make sure that they saw who they had to see and that they are taking care of whatever we thought that they needed to be taken care of. And so I'm just wondering if you've had experience with some of these populations. And again, it's not a deficit. I think it's a strength, but the students cannot process everything they need to do because they're doing multiple things, and they come from some traumatic experiences sometimes, or some oppressive experiences that they don't allow them to be able to say, oh, this is what I need to do, I'm just going to do it. And so it may require a back and forth. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that? And if you have experienced that, because I feel some of the things that we do is we have to be on top of the student emailing weekly to make sure that what we suggested has been taken care of, and then connecting with the other offices just to make sure that the student is receiving the care that we think it's going to be important for them.
Yeah, so I see a few different layers. One, I think coming in, I would want to know what exactly are the barriers, because it could look like a motivation issue. When students have history of trauma, it changes the brain, their executive functioning skills, so planning, organizing, time management, it's all impacted. And so I can see if that is one of the causes, right? Because that does take a little bit of planning, getting the piece of paper, do they need to make an appointment? Where is this facility? Brain overload, I'm just gonna avoid it. So is that one of the issues? If that is, I see an opportunity to have coaches that are specifically maybe trauma informed, but what are some of the symptoms of the trauma? Which one of them is executive functioning? Being able to plan, organize, and complete the task. So if that is, there's techniques to help students with executive functioning, which is impacted in trauma. So if that's one. Continue to look if there's any other barriers. Is it the hours? I know some students express some concerns about the hours being 9 to 4. Could we find ways to extend those hours so they actually make it to their appointment? And so continue to look at what the actual root cause, because it sounds like it could be, motivation, but it's very likely that there's probably a lot more going on. And so once we could get to the root of what is actually happening, understanding what happens to individuals when they go through so much trauma, then you can really be specific with your target interventions.
Thank you.
All right, going twice. Any other questions? Any other points? And if not, I think we could end the presentation. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Is that okay? Sounds good. Well, thank you. Yes, thank you everyone for participating. And you have a great day.
Bye.